The early afternoon sunlight spilled across the marble floor of the conservatory, casting delicate patterns of leaves and petals on the polished surface. Evelyn Harper Langston stood in the midst of it, gently arranging freshly cut hydrangeas and lilies into a crystal vase. Her hands, steady and experienced, moved with the grace of a woman who had long found peace in simplicity. The glass vase caught the light just right, sending rainbow fragments scattering across the floor. Outside the tall windows, the manicured gardens of the Langston estate basked in the gentle warmth of late spring. Birds chirped lazily, and the faint hum of bees pollinating her rose bushes was a pleasant soundtrack to her quiet afternoon. Evelyn had always found solace in the garden. It reminded her of her mother's home in Charleston, where long afternoons were spent clipping peonies and sipping sweet tea beneath the magnolias. But serenity is fragile, and sometimes all it takes is a whisper to break it. Evelyn was just trimming a stubborn stem when she heard it. Low voices, sharp and hurried, filtering in from the slightly ajar door that led from the conservatory to the dining room. At first, she thought it was the staff discussing preparations for the upcoming Langston Foundation Benefit Gala, or perhaps Robert's company board members talking shop before the quarterly review. But as she paused, scissors in hand, the words came into sharper focus. "She's nothing but a gold digger," a woman's voice hissed. Cold, entitled, familiar. Evelyn didn't move. Her breath held, suspended mid-motion. She latched on to Dad the second he started showing signs of weakness after Mom passed. I mean, really? Does anyone believe she's here out of love? She's a 66-year-old nobody who got lucky. That was Mia, Robert's eldest daughter, 42, with sculpted features, designer heels, and a permanent air of dissatisfaction. And now she parades around like she owns the place, Mia continued, her voice thick with disdain. I heard she wants to redecorate the music room. The music room. Can you imagine what Mom would say? Then came a man's voice, lower, colder, and laced with calculation. Let her play house a little longer. The prenup was ironclad, and Dad's will, we're updating it while she's off at her little book club meeting. She'll get nothing. Garrett. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the stem in her hand, but she didn't flinch, didn't gasp, didn't cry. Her spine remained perfectly straight. Instead, she carefully placed the stem on the table, wiped her hands on her linen apron, and stood silently. They think I'm weak, she thought. They think I married Robert for money, that I'm some poor, aging widow clawing for scraps at the Langston table. If only they knew. A small smile curled at the corner of her lips. Not a vindictive smile, not even a triumphant one. Just the quiet smile of a woman who had been underestimated before. Many times. They hadn't bothered to ask about her past, about her first husband, the late Richard Harper, about Harper Capital, about the family trust and her silent chairmanship on multiple corporate boards, about the private jet she hadn't flown since marrying Robert because she preferred commercial flights for their anonymity, about the 4 residences still sitting under her name, untouched and unassuming. They hadn't asked because they had assumed. And Evelyn had allowed it. She had let them believe she was a woman of modest means, content to quietly tend the garden, attend charity luncheons, and keep herself busy with bridge and book clubs. She had smiled through the slights, the veiled jabs at family dinners, the way they excluded her from legacy discussions. She had done it for Robert Langston, industrial magnate, chairman and CEO of Langston Manufacturing Group, a man who had, against all odds, fallen in love again in his 70s, with her, and she with him. He had been kind, warm, respectful, a true gentleman. He hadn't pursued her for her money. He hadn't even known she had any. They'd met at a fundraising auction for children's hospitals. She'd bid on a vintage piano for one of her foundations and caught his eye. He'd followed her out to her car to compliment her on her taste in instruments. They'd had coffee, then lunch, then more. He never once asked about her finances. She had told him she was comfortable, which was technically true. Comfortable just happened to mean owning assets that could swallow Langston Industries whole. Evelyn turned away from the flowers and walked slowly down the hallway toward the stairs, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the hardwood floors. She passed the grandfather clock. Mia had once told her it had been in the family for generations. "It predates you by over 100 years," she'd said with a smirk. Evelyn had only nodded. She could have pointed out that she had a clock at her New York apartment from the court of Louis Philippe, but she hadn't. Why boast when silence is sharper? She climbed the stairs to the second floor, her pace unhurried. She didn't confront them. Not yet. Confrontation was a tool best used when the board was set and the pieces in motion. Instead, she entered the small sitting room she had quietly claimed as her own, a sunlit space with a writing desk and a view of the orchard. She pulled out her phone, her private one, not the device Robert had given her when they married, and dialed a number she hadn't used in over a year. The line picked up after 2 rings. "Margaret?" a warm male voice answered. "Andre, it's Evelyn now. Evelyn Harper Langston." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "I wondered how long it would take before you called. I need a full portfolio, assets, holdings, current values, the works, and I need it in hard copy. You're ready then?" "It's time they knew who they're dealing with," she said. There was a beat of silence. Then, more softly, "Robert, he doesn't know yet, but he will, and he'll understand. Of course, I'll be on the next flight." Evelyn ended the call and sat at her desk. She glanced out the window, past the blooming pear trees, to the long gravel drive where Robert's car would soon return from the office. "They think they've won," she thought. "That I'll quietly fade into the background, leave without a fuss once they twist their father's will. They have no idea." She opened a small drawer and removed a delicate gold pen, a gift from her father when she graduated from Wharton. The engraving on the side read, "Never underestimate quiet power." She smiled again. They thought she was finished, but the game hadn't even started yet. The wind rustled gently through the ivy that curled up the stone columns of the Langston Estates veranda. Evelyn sat at the edge of the whitewashed swing that creaked softly beneath her, her hands folded loosely in her lap. A tray of untouched tea rested on the side table. The china cup before her had grown cold, forgotten. Like so many other things in this house, she didn't notice. Her mind was elsewhere, retracing the quiet years that had led her to this very moment. 3 years. 3 years since she had walked into this house as Robert Langston's new wife. Not as Evelyn Harper, the quietly powerful heiress of one of the most successful private capital firms on the East Coast, but as the modest widow of a long-deceased businessman. 3 years since she'd first been introduced to his children. Garrett's cold handshake, Mia's tight-lipped smile, and Sarah's hesitant curiosity. They had been polite at first, cordial in a way that suggested careful inspection rather than welcome. Evelyn had grown up in drawing rooms where subtlety was an art form. She recognized judgment wrapped in sweetness. From the very beginning, they hadn't truly seen her. They hadn't wanted to. And so, she had made herself invisible. She attended dinners and made herself small. She complimented the family heirlooms without ever mentioning she owned similar or superior ones. When Mia bragged about her invitation to the governor's fundraiser, Evelyn only nodded, never pointing out she had hosted the event the previous year under her foundation's name. When Garrett explained market movements to her over brandy, she listened silently, even though she had once sat on the investment board of one of the country's largest financial institutions. Evelyn could have corrected them, but she didn't. Silence, she knew, could be louder than noise. It had power. And Evelyn had learned long ago that sometimes, to truly see someone, you had to let them believe you were no one. But now, after what she had overheard in the dining room, the sneers, the scheming, it was clear that time had bought her nothing but further insult. Her patience, her restraint, had been mistaken for weakness, and that would not stand. A knock came at the door frame, light but deliberate. Evelyn turned. "Mrs. Langston?" A voice, familiar, respectful. It was Marion, the housekeeper, holding a small white envelope. "This was delivered for you, from New York." Evelyn nodded, taking it gently. "Thank you, Marion." After the woman left, Evelyn slit the envelope open and unfolded the single page inside. Neat handwriting in a style she knew well. Andre's. "Evelyn, as requested, enclosed is a full overview of your current personal and corporate holdings. I've taken the liberty of including 3 strategic partnership scenarios, should you wish to propose collaboration between Harper Capital and Langston Industries. I trust you'll deploy them with your usual precision. Warm regards, A.B." She smiled faintly and tucked the letter away. The documents would arrive tomorrow by courier. Everything was in motion now. She stood and went inside, passing through the cool elegance of the library. Rows of books lined the walnut shelves, many of them unread. She paused before a framed portrait of Robert's first wife, Eleanor Langston. Poised, regal, eyes full of quiet command. It was clear that the children had adored her. Evelyn had never tried to replace Eleanor. She had respected her memory, left her things untouched, even curated her rose garden. But no amount of reverence had softened Garrett or Mia. As she passed into the hallway, she heard voices from the drawing room, soft laughter. Sarah's. Curious, Evelyn followed the sound and stepped quietly into the doorway. Sarah stood near the fireplace, her iPad in hand, showing Robert photos of a community project she'd helped fund in Hartford. Robert's face beamed with pride. "I'm telling you, Dad, the after-school programs are working," Sarah said. "Dropout rates are down. Evelyn's foundation helped us get the STEM kits. The kids love it." Robert turned and spotted Evelyn. "There she is. Speak of the angel. Sarah was just telling me about your education initiative." Evelyn entered with a warm smile. "She's doing the real work. I just signed the checks." "That's not true," Sarah said, lowering the iPad. "You helped redesign the mentorship program. We're rolling that out next quarter." Evelyn's gaze softened. "I'm glad to help. Empowering girls to see themselves in science and leadership, that's close to my heart." Robert watched them both, clearly pleased. "Maybe you should speak at this year's gala, Evelyn." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Me? Why not?" he said. "You're the quiet force behind so many of our projects. It's time people know." Not yet, Evelyn thought, but soon. Later that evening, in the privacy of her sitting room, Evelyn opened the drawer where she kept her late husband's journal. Richard Harper had been a brilliant mind and a strategic partner, her equal in every sense. His loss had been crushing, but in the solitude that followed, she had built her own legacy atop the one they shared. She flipped through the pages, her fingers brushing notes on mergers, ethical investing, and philanthropy. You'd have liked Robert, she murmured to the pages. He's a good man, but his children, they've made it hard. The door creaked open. Robert stood there, his expression soft. I hope I'm not intruding. Never, she said, gesturing to the armchair beside her. He sat. For a moment, neither spoke. You've been quiet lately, Robert said. Evelyn tilted her head. Quieter than usual? He smiled. Yes, but something tells me it's not the comfortable kind of quiet. It's the calculating kind. She looked at him carefully. And how do you feel about that? I feel, he said, taking her hand, that I trust you. But I also know my children haven't made it easy for you. No, she admitted, they haven't. He sighed. Garrett and Mia, they're fiercely protective of the legacy Eleanor and I built. Sometimes that love takes the shape of suspicion. Suspicion can be dangerous when mixed with entitlement, she said softly. He nodded, his face grave. Are you telling me something, Evelyn? Not yet, she said, but soon. There's a conversation we need to have about the future. He studied her face, the lines of quiet resolve, the poise he had always admired. Is it about the will? In part, she replied, but more than that, it's about truth and respect. He kissed her hand gently. Whatever it is, I'll stand with you. The next morning, Evelyn called her daughter, Grace, from her first marriage. At 40, Grace Harper was the president of Harper Capital and a force in her own right. Mother, Grace greeted with affectionate sarcasm. I was beginning to think you'd vanished into the Langston Gardens forever. Not quite, Evelyn replied with a chuckle. I need you to review the collaboration outline Andre sent. I'm planning to present it at Robert's family meeting next week. Oh? Grace's voice sharpened with interest. Finally lifting the veil? They made that decision for me, Evelyn said coolly, by trying to erase me. Grace was quiet for a beat. Want me to fly in? Not yet, Evelyn said. This is a Langston family matter, but soon. If they're smart, we'll need you for the next stage. What about Robert? I'll tell him everything before the meeting. Grace exhaled. Well, when the moment comes, be ruthless but gracious, like always. Evelyn smiled. Naturally. That afternoon she met Sarah again in the garden, where Sarah had taken an interest in Evelyn's peonies. They spoke about the upcoming Langston meeting. Dad says we're all expected next Friday, Sarah said, brushing dirt from her hands. Mia's been working on some proposal. She's being secretive. Evelyn's lips curved. I look forward to it. Sarah gave her a sidelong glance. You're up to something. I am, Evelyn admitted, meeting her eyes with calm honesty. Sarah hesitated. Does it have to do with what Mia said the other day, in the dining room? Evelyn's smile froze. You heard that? I heard enough. Evelyn paused. Then you know how little they think of me? Sarah looked down at the flower bed. They've made assumptions, but I haven't. I'm still forming my opinion. Evelyn nodded. That's fair. She reached over and plucked a blossom, handing it to Sarah. Sometimes, she said, what you plant in silence blooms louder than anything spoken. Sarah studied her for a long moment, then accepted the flower. I'll be at the meeting, and I'll listen. As the sun dipped below the treetops, Evelyn felt something stir within her. Not revenge, but resolution. The Langston children had lived in a world where power came from name and inheritance. But Evelyn had built empires quietly, and soon the silence would end. Langston Tower rose above the city skyline like a steel and glass monument to industry and legacy. The top 3 floors housed the executive suite, with panoramic views of the harbor and polished interiors that whispered wealth and power. On most days, the space was a hive of calculated energy, a place where multi-million-dollar decisions were made over filtered coffee and brushed leather chairs. But today, the atmosphere was different. Today, it was tense. Evelyn stepped out of the private elevator onto the 39th floor at exactly 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the quarterly Langston family board meeting. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she crossed the corridor, her posture as upright and composed as ever. But everything else about her was subtly transformed. Gone was the soft cashmere and linen of her usual attire. Today, she wore a sharply tailored navy blue suit, Harper blue, as Andre called it, a color that symbolized legacy, control, and quiet force. A single strand of pearls graced her neck, and her silver blonde hair was pinned in a low, elegant chignon. She carried no handbag, only a sleek leather portfolio with her initials EHH embossed in gold. As she approached the glass-paneled boardroom, she caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection. There she was, not the book club widow Garrett and Mia had dismissed, but the woman who once negotiated logistics routes across 5 continents, who oversaw philanthropic ventures larger than most family businesses. Evelyn Harper Langston, unveiled. Inside, the Langston boardroom buzzed with muted conversation. Garrett stood near the head of the table, chatting with Mia, both dressed for the occasion. He in a dark gray suit with a crimson tie, she in a sharp pantsuit that seemed more armor than clothing. Sarah sat further down, thumbing through a packet of notes. The Langston executive team, CFOs, strategy heads, and operations officers occupied their usual places. All conversation ceased as Evelyn entered. She didn't blink. She smiled politely, greeted the board members by name, names they didn't expect her to know, and took the seat to Robert's right, the position traditionally reserved for his most trusted advisor. "Good morning, everyone," Robert said, his tone as even as ever. "We'll begin with the standard operational review, then turn to new business." Garrett exchanged a glance with Mia. Clearly, they had expected to lead that final portion. The meeting proceeded smoothly. Charts, numbers, projections, all of which Evelyn absorbed silently. She took notes, asked a single, surgically precise question about Langston's Asian distribution partnerships, and nodded thoughtfully when the CFO replied. Then came the shift. Robert cleared his throat. "Before we continue to new business, I'd like to offer the floor to Evelyn. She has something important to share. I ask that you give her your full attention." Garrett's brow furrowed. Mia's expression soured. Sarah looked up interested. Evelyn stood, adjusting the papers in her hands. "Thank you, Robert," she began, her voice calm, clear, unwavering. "And thank you all for your time this morning. I know my presence in these meetings has been unusual. I've chosen, for the past 3 years, to stay in the background, to observe, to learn, and, if I'm being honest, to allow space for the relationships in this family to evolve naturally." Her eyes moved slowly across the room, pausing momentarily on each of Robert's children. "But silence," she continued, "can be misinterpreted. It can be mistaken for ignorance or weakness. And I believe that assumption has colored how some of you perceive me." A hush fell over the room. The executives leaned forward slightly. Mia's mouth was a thin line. "So, today," Evelyn said, "I'd like to correct the record." She opened her portfolio and removed a folder, handing it to Andre, who stood quietly near the door. He began distributing copies to each board member, as well as to Robert's children. In these folders, Evelyn continued, you'll find an executive summary of my background, my current holdings, and a proposal for strategic collaboration between Harper Capital and Langston Industries. Mia let out a soft scoff as she flipped open the folder, then went silent. Garrett, who had already skimmed the first page, paled. My name is Evelyn Harper Langston, she said. I am the sole heir to Harper Capital, one of the largest privately held capital investment firms in the country. I assumed control of the company after my husband, Richard Harper, passed away 10 years ago. We were married for 40 years. The room was dead silent. Our holdings span across 4 continents, with investments in technology, green infrastructure, shipping, and education. The Harper Foundation has supported over 300 institutions globally. My net worth, as of last quarter, exceeds $9.4 billion. She let the silence linger. The executives looked between one another, stunned. Sarah blinked rapidly, trying to process what she was hearing. Garrett looked as if he might be sick. Mia found her voice first. So this was all some sort of test? Evelyn turned her eyes to her. No, she said evenly. This was my life, and I chose not to flaunt it. When I met your father, I didn't lead with numbers. I didn't want him to fall in love with Harper Capital. I wanted him to fall in love with Evelyn. And he did. Robert reached for her hand. She placed hers in his without hesitation. Garrett spoke next. And what? Now we're supposed to believe you've just been sitting on this? Yes, Evelyn replied, because I thought, perhaps naively, that in time I would be accepted for who I was, not for what I owned. She took a breath. But when I overheard a conversation about amending Robert's will to exclude me while I was supposedly at a silly book club, I realized that silence would only lead to more erasure. Mia flushed. I don't need your father's money, Evelyn continued, nor do I want it, but I will not stand quietly while my name is dragged and my character impugned. She turned a page in her copy of the proposal. Which brings me to this. Harper Capital is currently seeking partnerships with manufacturing firms for a new green tech initiative. Langston Industries is a prime candidate. You have the infrastructure. We have the capital and global channels. The proposal before you outlines a potential collaboration that could redefine both of our futures. The CFO, Mr. Delaney, cleared his throat. Mrs. Langston, this is unprecedented. If even half of these figures are accurate, they are, Andre cut in smoothly, verified independently and filed with federal oversight committees last quarter. Sarah looked up from her packet. I knew you were something, she said softly, but this I never imagined. Evelyn smiled gently. Few do. That's the luxury of being underestimated. Garrett was silent, his eyes on the table. Mia's hand trembled slightly as she turned a page. Robert stood slowly. I think we've all had quite the revelation today, he said, but let me be clear. Evelyn is my wife, my partner, and from this day forward, she is to be treated as such, in every room by every person who bears my name. Evelyn turned the final page. I'm not here to humiliate anyone, she said, but I'm here to be seen, fully, and to give you the choice, to partner with me in building something extraordinary, or continue clinging to a version of me that never existed. The silence that followed was not awkward, it was reverent. Then Sarah spoke, her voice calm and curious. What are the projected yields from the Harper Langston Green Tech Initiative? Evelyn's smile returned. I'm glad you asked. The sun had dipped low by the time the Langston Industries boardroom emptied, casting long amber shadows across the floor. The energy in the room, once thick with tension, had shifted to something quieter, uncertain, contemplative. Some executives had offered tight nods as they left, others muttered polite astonishment, still absorbing the revelation. But Evelyn remained seated, her papers neatly stacked, her hands folded atop them. Beside her, Robert sat silently, not with shock, but with a kind of peaceful admiration that made her heart ache. "You should have told me," he said gently, turning toward her. "I know," she replied, looking down. "I almost did, so many times, but it felt selfish to ruin the simple joy of being known only as your wife." He shook his head. "You were never just my wife, Evelyn, but you are the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Today only confirmed what I already suspected." She smiled softly. "That I wasn't in it for your money?" "No," he said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "That you were someone worth following." They stayed that way for a moment, quiet amid the high-rise silence, until a knock sounded at the glass door. It was Sarah. "Is this a bad time?" she asked, peeking in. "Not at all," Evelyn said. "Come in." Sarah stepped inside, her expression more open than Evelyn had ever seen it. She looked between them before speaking. "I just wanted to say thank you for the way you handled that. It couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," Evelyn replied, "but it was necessary." Sarah nodded, then pulled out a chair and sat across from them. "I spent the last hour rereading the proposal," she said. "It's brilliant. The opportunity for expansion into sustainable production is exactly what Langston needs to stay competitive long term. Garrett will come around. He's already emailing Delaney questions. Mia, on the other hand, she'll need time," Robert said with a sigh. "She takes change personally." "I understand," Evelyn said, "but this change isn't going anywhere. Not now." Sarah hesitated. "When you said you wanted to be seen, it struck me. You've been here all along, and we never really tried to know you. It's easier to protect our stories when we don't let in new ones," Evelyn replied. "But the truth is always bigger than the version we cling to." Sarah looked down, her fingers brushing the edge of the table. "If you ever wanted help expanding the education wing of your foundation, I'd love to be involved." Evelyn smiled, full and genuine. "I would love that." The next few days passed in quiet recalibration. Evelyn and Robert returned to their estate, though the house felt different now, lighter. Robert, ever practical, spent his hours reviewing the proposed partnership with fresh eyes. Evelyn, for the first time in years, allowed her assistant to begin transitioning operations from the background into the Langston household. Her files were delivered. Her office, once hidden in a guest room closet, was moved into the west study. The Harper name, once silent in the halls of Langston Legacy, now belonged. Garrett was the first to call. He didn't apologize directly. He spoke in numbers, in strategy, in phrases like synergistic potential and accelerated growth. Evelyn understood this was his language, and she didn't need an apology. What she needed, he was offering respect. Mia, on the other hand, was silent. Days passed with no word, until the night of the Langston Foundation's annual charity gala. The ballroom at the Metropolitan Club was aglow with gold chandeliers and warm laughter. The city's elite wandered between tables dressed in black tie elegance. Robert mingled near the stage, greeting donors. Evelyn stood near the edge of the room, speaking with Grace, her daughter from her first marriage, who had flown in from Boston that morning. "I see them," Grace said, nodding discreetly. Evelyn turned. Mia Langston, in a deep burgundy gown, stood at the entrance, her posture as poised as ever. She scanned the room with a surgical precision, then saw Evelyn. Their eyes locked. Evelyn excused herself and walked calmly toward her. "Mia," she said, tone polite but open. "I wasn't sure I'd come," Mia replied coolly. "But then I read the proposal again." Evelyn waited. "It's sound," Mia admitted, "and well-timed. Langston needs the capital and the direction." "But," Mia's jaw tensed, "you embarrassed us. You let us believe you were some desperate widow." "I let you believe whatever you were inclined to," Evelyn said. "That's not the same as deception." Mia exhaled slowly. "And now everyone knows. The board, the press, even people at the club are talking. They'd have talked eventually. Better to give them truth to talk about." Mia said nothing for a moment, then added, "The foundation work you've done, it's impressive. I didn't realize." "You didn't ask," Evelyn said gently. Mia looked away, then back. "I was protecting my mother's legacy, or thought I was." "I never tried to erase her, Mia," Evelyn said. "I only tried to earn a place beside her memory, not instead of it." The words hung there for a moment. Then, quietly, Mia said, "Maybe next year you'll let me help plan the gala." Evelyn inclined her head. "I'd be honored." That night, at the Langston estate, Evelyn returned to her sitting room with a full heart. She stood at the window, watching the moonlight reflect off the garden fountain. Behind her, Robert entered with 2 glasses of wine. "To progress," he said, handing her one. "To grace," she replied, lifting it in toast, "in all its forms." As they sat together, Evelyn scrolled through her phone and opened an email draft addressed to Grace. Subject, Gala Debrief. Grace, one ally confirmed, one strategist cautiously aligned, and the skeptic extended an olive branch. "We're making progress. Let's talk expansion." She hit send, then leaned back against her husband, his arm warm around her shoulder. The woman they had called a gold digger, the woman they dismissed as a burden, had not just proven them wrong. She had shown them what it meant to lead, not with power thrown like a sword, but with strength honed through patience, conviction, and the unshakable knowledge of who she truly was. Evelyn Harper Langston wasn't there to take anything from the Langston family. She was there to give them a future they never saw coming. If this story moved you even a little, take a second to subscribe. It helps us keep sharing these powerful journeys. And let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories reach.